Hello boys and girls, this is Mr. Denney, and today I'm going to be reading to you a book called Martin the Guitar, and it was written by one of my professors when I was at Berry College many years ago. He didn't write it many years ago, but he was my professor back then. And I'm not doing a video because there's music that goes along with this, and to make a recording I needed to be able to add in musical tracks, so you won't be able to see my face, but you will get to hear my voice. I hope everyone's having as much fun as they can during this time. I hope that you're enjoying spending time with your family, and I hope that we can get together again soon. So let's get started with the book. Martin the Guitar, written by Harry Musselwhite and illustrated by Brian Barr. Martin the Guitar lived in the most famous music store in New York City. Martin stood proudly at the front of a long line of beautiful guitars of all shapes and sizes. Martin's special soft, sweet tone, shiny gold keys, and polished wood made him a favorite of the owner, Mr. Carlo Beninato. Mr. Benninato's father, Luigi, came from Italy many years ago on a steamship and built the music store on a beautiful tree-lined street near the Hudson River. People who walked in front of the shop always stopped and admired the beautiful musical instruments in the store window. World-famous musicians came to Benninato's music shop to try out the marvelous instruments. The musicians filled the store with sweet musical sounds. At the back of the store stood a large portrait of Carlo's father, Luigi Benninato. Carlo was proud of his father's portrait, and every day he would polish the frame before opening the front door for business. In a glass case in front of the portrait sat another important resident of Benninato's music shop, Strada the violin. Strada was one of the most famous violins in the whole world, and in the old days, Luigi had played Strada in orchestras in the greatest cities of Europe. Now Strada never leaves her case and always sleeps on a velvet rug right in front of Mr. Luigi's portrait. Often, a member of one of New York's finest orchestras would march in humming a tune from a famous symphony. Musicians would often beg Carlo to let them play Strada, but he would always politely refuse and look up at his father's portrait and give him a wink. The apple of Carlo's eye was Martin the Guitar. When Martin first came to the shop, Carlo placed a card right in front of Martin. The card read, "Instrument of the Month." Scruffy folk musicians would enter the shop and immediately pick up Martin and play a chord. Carlo would stand nearby and beam as the soft sounds floated from Martin's strings. But when the folk musicians played Martin's big brothers, the dreadnoughts, they always purchased them instead. The dreadnoughts made a loud sound, and the folk musicians felt they needed louder instruments. Carlo would make the sale and sigh as the customers exited. "Someday, my little friend, you will find the perfect owner," whispered Carlo. Every day Martin would make his best sounds, but he never found an owner. Carlo loved the music Martin made, but he soon took down the "Instrument of the Month" sign and moved Martin down the row behind the dreadnoughts, or Big D's, as they were called in the shop. Martin became very sad, and soon his strings didn't shimmer as they used to, and sometimes his soft tone was so soft no one could hear it. Martin wanted to be placed in the spot of honor as Instrument of the Month in front of all the Big D's. He may have been one of the smallest guitars in the shop, but nobody seemed to want him. One day, Mr. Beninato would come by and pat Martin on the shoulder. Mr. Beninato knew that Martin was a wonderful instrument, but he wondered if Martin would ever find a home. This made Mr. Beninato very sad. All day long, Mr. Beninato scurried from one customer to another. He made made small repairs on some instruments, selected sets of strings for others, and rang up sales on his old antique brass cash register. By the end of the day, Mr. Beninato was quite tired. He went to the front door, and just before he turned out the lights, he bid his instruments good evening. "Good night, all you noble instruments," he said. "Good night, Martin. A special sweet rest to you," he said. And with a twinkle in his eye, Mr. Beninato looked up at his father's portrait. "Good night, Papa," he said. Mr. Beninato always felt he could hear his father's voice call out softly, "And good night to you, dear son." Mr. Beninato turned out the lights, took one last look around, locked the door, and set off down the street for his evening meal. The magic was about to begin. As if rousing from a deep sleep, all the instruments in the shop began to yawn and stretch. A sweet note from a violin sounded, and a deep bass note from a guitar answered. From the floor of the store came the plink-plink of the banjo string. At the end of the long row of very expensive guitars yawned Martin the guitar. Suddenly a big voice echoed throughout the store. "Tonight I will begin our evening concert," came the booming voice of Big D. Big D was the largest guitar in the shop, and he had the place of honor at the front of the guitar row. Big D had golden tuners, pearl highlights, and his body was made of rare wood from across the sea. A shimmering chord sang out from Big D's strings, and the entire shop grew quiet. Big D's voice rang out throughout the store, and all the other instruments listened with admiration and respect. Big D's body was pure rock and roll. All the other instruments moved in time to the driving rhythm. Every instrument in the store swayed to the melody and tapped in time to the funky beat. At the end of Big D's solo, all the instruments cheered. "Thank you, one and all," said Big D with his basso profondo voice. Big D looked around the shop, and the instruments turned their faces towards him with great expectation. It was a great honor to be chosen to follow the great D's nightly solo. Big D didn't choose the next instrument that night. He asked a question. "Who would like to perform next?" The room became as quiet as a church. A few instruments coughed nervously. Suddenly, from the back of the room, a sweet small voice called, "I'd like to play," said Martin the guitar. All the faces turned to the back of the shop. "Who said that?" boomed Big D. "I did," answered Martin. "It's the kid," cackled Lore the mandolin. Lore was one of the most expensive instruments in the shop, and he often shared jokes with Big D about the other instruments. The banjos on the floor of the shop all joined in with laughter. Lore joined in their laughter and looked at Big D for approval. "Silence!" shouted Big D. The laughter stopped at once. No one liked to anger the Big D. "Well, little Martin," said Big D, "do you think you've got what it takes to play for this important crowd?" All the other instruments started murmuring to each other, doubting Martin's ability. Suddenly, a cultured and elegant voice pierced the chatter. "I think you should give him a chance, Mr. Dreadnought," announced Strada the violin. The instruments in Mr. Benanato's music shop had never heard the voice of one of the most famous violins in the world. Big D and all the instruments froze at the sound of Strada's silky voice. Like a noble queen, Strada walked to the front of the store and stood right in front of Big D. All the other guitars took a step back, but Big D stood his ground. "Well, Mr. Dreadnought, what do you think?" asked Strata. Stammered Big D. "Speak up, guitar," demanded Strata, "or do you need a mandolin to do the talking for you?" Strata turned her gaze to lower the mandolin, who shrunk back immediately. Members of the violin family began to speak up in support of Strata. "Yeah, let him play. He has a right to play just like anybody else," said another cello. A big but very shy string bass stood above the cellos and called, "Yeah, we're tired of you always being the big boss, Mr. D." Big D gave the tall string bass a very mean look, and the instrument shrunk back to his corner of the shop. Strata turned to Big D. "Well?" "Oh, all right," said Big D angrily, and he stomped off. Strata turned to Martin the guitar, who was beginning to get nervous about his bold move. "Okay, young man," she cooed, "make that sweet music that you love to make." Martin turned around and saw all the instruments looking at him. The banjos were making terrible faces, but the violin smiled from bridge to neck. Martin took a deep breath, and a waterfall of notes fell from his 6 strings. Each cascade of notes, soft and sweet, called up more and more beautiful sounds until the shop was filled with a river of string sounds, the likes of which had never been heard in Benedetto's music shop. Now, being the smallest guitar in the shop didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the music spilling out of Martin the guitar. As the melody from Martin's body began to swell, even Strata came under the small guitar spell. All of a sudden, Strata's magnificent voice soared over Martin's notes, and the two played a duet that held all the instruments in awe. Higher and higher Strata sang, and without fear. Martin the guitar played as she flew. Strata's eyes closed as she played notes she had not thought about in years. At the back of the shop, her brother and sister violins wiped tears of joy from their eyes. Even the banjos, who had never heard such music, were overcome with musical delight. The duet slowly came to an end, and Strata stopped playing in order to listen to Martin the guitar's last few chords. At last, only one note rang out from the guitar's lowest string. Martin held his breath. The store was silent. Then every instrument erupted in shouts and cheers. "Hooray for Martin!" rang the cellos. "3 cheers for Martin the guitar!" yelled the shy string bass. Big D walked up to Martin, and the room grew quiet. Big D slapped Martin on the back and crowed, "Instrument of the month!" Everybody took up Big D's cheer. "Instrument of the month! Instrument of the month!" rang out throughout the store. With a sigh and a smile, Strata turned and walked back to her glass case. All the instruments quickly formed a double line and bowed as she majestically marched back to her case. Just before she got into the glass case, she looked up at Luigi's smiling face and blew a sweet kiss at the portrait. Martin raced back and reached her just before she lay down. "Oh, Strata, however can I thank you?" "Thank me? For what, young guitar?" said Strata. "You stood up for me and gave me the courage to do my best," said Martin. "I thought I would never find a home, but now I know that someday soon I will be taken from the shop by one of the best musicians around. I just know it." "Young Martin, you had it in you all the time. You just needed to believe in yourself." Believe in myself. That's it. The next morning, the streets of New York City were beautiful. The sun was shining and every tree on the avenue was fresh with new green leaves. It seemed all the world was in bloom as Mr. Beninato walked to his store. The beautiful day cheered Mr. Beninato. Mr. Beninato was so happy that he even whistled a tune by Mozart as he walked along. Mr. Beninato reached his store, and as he bent down to pick up the morning's paper, he noticed a note attached to his front door. He reached down and took the letter from the door. Dear Mr. Beninato, the letter read, please don't sell the little shiny guitar you call Martin. I want to buy it and give it as a birthday present for my brother, who is a folk singer in Georgia. Mr. Beninato grinned from ear to ear as he unlocked the door to his shop. As he entered, he flipped on the light switch, and the store burst into light. What? Exclaimed Mr. Beninato. Standing at the front of the guitar row and leading a proud line of famous dreadnoughts was none other than Martin the guitar. The sign at Martin's feet read, Instrument of the Month. The end.